Welcome to Three Takes. I'm Ashana.
I'm Manali.
I'm Mona.
Three women.
Three generations.
One family, unpacking the questions we all ask.
Welcome to Three Takes. Today we are talking about something we all want, a sense of belonging. And today the world is the most connected to the technology, but I think people feeling more and more lonely and isolated. So we have a really special guest who is an artist, entrepreneur, and a good friend of mine, Paula Toledo. Paula is a founder of a company, Ode to Wonder Consulting, where she's helping, individuals and organizations to build the culture, the belonging, the connection. But what really drew us, it was not just Paula's work. It was her personal journey. Through profound loss and rebuilding her own life, she discovered that belonging isn't just something we hope to find. It's something we intentionally create. So Paula, thank you so much for being here. We are really excited to have this conversation with you. And as I mentioned, that one thing which really stayed with me when very first time I met you is that how openly you shared your own journey. And I would love to start from there if you are willing to share a little about your story to our listeners and how it led to the work you are doing today.
Oh, thanks, Mona. Thanks, Manali, for having me as your guest. Really happy to be here. So, yes, initially my background is in business and marketing and strategy. And I left that to pursue a life as a singer-songwriter and an artist. And it was during that period that I became a mother as well. And after my second son was born, just weeks after he was born, I lost my husband very suddenly and very tragically. I was living in Vancouver at the time, but all my family was in Montreal. So I packed up my bags and basically moved our home into my sister and her husband's bedroom for about 6 months. And I was really very fortunate to feel that sense of belonging with my family. They really helped support me during this profound time of grief and loss. Months later, I'd also lost my mother to cancer. So it was sort of a double loss that I was experiencing, but also a time in my life that was also of incredible joy in welcoming my younger son and caring for my toddler. But what happened was during that time, just, the trauma, the grief, the loss, both from the loss of relationships, but also loss of place and loss of home and loss of community, my body was expressing itself through just really seizing up. I wasn't able to nurse or lactate as a result. I wasn't able to feed my newborn, which to me was extremely meaningful to be a mother. I'd always wanted to be a mother. I loved being a mother. And to not be able to nurse my son was really another loss. And so I went to see a doctor, a physician at a clinic, and I asked her if she could help me because I was told that I needed to move my body in order to release some of this chronic pain. And I really couldn't wrap my head around how to do that, given that I was nursing a newborn, caring for a toddler, not really sleeping well. And she was so astute and so kind. She really listened to me and asked me a list of questions. And I realize now, after the fact, that she was pre-screening me to understand if I was experiencing postpartum depression. And when she determined that I wasn't and that I was grieving, she referred me to a social care coordinator, a social worker. She said, this woman's going to come visit you in your home over the course of several weeks. And this woman came to my home. Her name was Nicole, and she did some motivational interviewing to understand what mattered to me, what were my needs, and how could she connect me to movement classes and community. And when she learned that I was a singer-songwriter, she really encouraged me to write music and to write it with my community. So I began writing songs over the internet and sharing it with people all over the world, in Ireland and Australia, in Vancouver, friends and musicians. And it was a lifeline. It really helped me get my energy back. At first, I didn't think it was going to do much, but just being connected to people in my community was really such an important thing to help me feel that self-efficacy, that belief that I could affect a positive change in my life, that I had it in me to do that. And so what resulted was I had enough energy now to play with my eldest son, who became a priority as well, because I realized that he was suffering a double loss, his father and the lack of my attention. And so it was so difficult because I didn't have much energy for much other than nursing and sleeping. But I would set an egg timer for 20 minutes and literally force myself to go and play with him in his playroom. At first, I thought, how am I going to get through this 20 minutes? But I realized, as I was playing with him, he was so full of wonder and so full of joy that I was in a flow state. After 20 minutes, after the buzzer rang, I couldn't believe that 20 minutes had passed. And I had just completely entered his world of wonder, and it had become a form of contagion where I just felt so much more uplifted afterwards, so much more energized. And it really made me realize that that creative part and my sense of wonder had just completely vanished, like the grief had overtaken it. But when it had surfaced through that experience of playing with my son, it actually revitalized me and made me want to do it more. So I started looking forward to these play sessions with him, and it spawned my own sense of play and my own writing. And that's when I started Ode to Wonder. I started writing these blogs, if you will, of like all my Ode to Wonders that I encountered during a day. And I mean, you have to remember, like, I was pretty sedentary being a stay-at-home mom with a newborn and a 2-year-old. But when I would go out to actually get my hair done, which was what I had time for, I would write about the experience of the salon and how it was my Ode to Wonder and how the people that worked there were so kind and how I loved the aesthetic of the place and they were so talented at what they did. And that just really brought me a lot of joy. And so that's what spawned Ode to Wonder and the work that I'm doing now and helping, nurture connection, nurture wonder, nurture awe, nurture a sense of belonging and a sense of mattering in our communities and in workplaces.
Thank you for sharing that. There are so many things stuck with me, but one of the things really stuck with me was how grief wasn't only about losing someone. It also changed your sense of belonging, energy, everything.
Absolutely. They call them secondary losses, but, such an identity shift, from being an active part of the community. My late husband and I were sailors. I was also active in the musical community, like all of that, because we had moved, was now not really present in my life. So my identity as somebody who was really active and fit and musical and creative, like, it's not that it's gone, but it's like, it just seems dormant. And, we know that engaging in hobbies and activities and all the studies and research on even arts and cultural engagement, that engaging in it can boost your self-esteem and self-confidence. So it really is important for our own well-being.
First of all, I'm in awe in general of your story and how uplifting you are. But I could really connect with this idea of identity shift as a stay-at-home mom. So right now I'm unemployed. I have this 3-month period before I start work back in the hospital. And this idea that you brought up of play as a flow state, I think is one I haven't heard of before, but something I think I can really try to reframe my mindset around, because in my mind, I just have a laundry list of things to do.
Yes.
And it sounds like in your experience, you really allowed yourself to be present and slow down during that identity shift. And I'm just wondering if you can take us back, because there was always in this time period, loss, grief, but then also the sense of finding yourself. If you could maybe tell us ways, what was your first thought process when, you had a newborn son, you had this toddler, and then you had the loss of your husband? Who were the people you turned to? What was your first thought, and how were you able to pick yourself back up?
Yeah, I could think the way that I'm built is I was very fortunate to have people around me in my professional life that really pushed me hard, and probably pushed me harder than I thought I was capable of achieving certain things. And so, I kind of give them credit to almost training my mind to realize that I'm capable of accomplishing much more than I think I'm capable of accomplishing. And so whenever there's a problem in my life, I always think, well, there has to be a solution. There has to be a solution. And I remember just one very, like, it was an epiphany one night when I was nursing my son. My 2-year-old was asleep in bed next to us as I was nursing my son. And I just couldn't believe that our lives had taken such a drastic turn. Like, how can one's life go from being so rich, so meaningful, so beautiful, so connected, to then all of a sudden it not being that way? Like, or most of it, like I was very connected to my family and my children, so I was grateful for that. But there was so much loss. It was like, somebody had pulled the rug out from under us and all the furniture was upside down in the air. And it was just like, I was like, whoa, this is just like chaos and debris. And I recall thinking, well, just as life can pull out the rug from under you in one fell swoop, the opposite must also be true. Like, I literally must be able to wake up one morning, turn around the corner and go, whoa, and just like, where did this bounty come from? Like, just collide with it. And so it was this sense of hope that life, could really turn the corner very, very quickly in both directions. And so I woke up every morning really excited to see my children. I would play with them. They would make me laugh. Children are really silly. And I just would really be present with that sense of play, like that flow state. Like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who, studies the theory of flow, talks a lot about how flow is when you have, a skill that is just beyond your reach and you have the skill set, but you're trying to attain a goal, but what you're trying to attain is just above your skill set. And so, like, you think play is like, yeah, everyone can play. But during that time, when I was not sleeping, barely feeding myself, taking care of a newborn, like trying to figure out where we're going to live, grieving the loss of my mother, grieving the loss of my husband, it was really, really hard to play. But I knew I had it in me. I knew I had that creativity and that sense of play in me. So because there was just that slight gap in terms of my skill set and what I was capable at the time and what I was trying to achieve, which was to really be present, play with my son, I was able to enter that flow state. So when you think about it from the sense of, a personal or professional perspective as well, play and being playful in the workplace can express itself in many different ways, right? But it can sometimes feel hard to do when we are still encumbered with our to-do lists and with deadlines. But if we can find that balance of exercising or activating our strengths that engage with the play in order to achieve certain goals, even when it's really difficult and a very, challenging time for a team, then you can enter flow states.
And that's really interesting what you say, that play is such a simple thing. But when you are sleep deprived, your confidence is gone. The people who you really rely, they are not there. So even something as simple as playing, you have to really motivate yourself to even do that. That's an effort, right?
Right. And I would argue even just like being an adult, like I do think in general play is a skill set above most normal functioning adults, because like you said, there's just other life stressors that get in the way of people being curious and childlike. Another thing that I wanted to pull from your story is you talk about music as a way of like connecting and building community. And it sounds like part of this was an online community. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, especially in a world where we're connected, but also disconnected, with online and social media. Like how do you see these kinds of social media platforms as community builders? But then at the same time, like, why is there a loneliness epidemic?
Yes. So social media, I see it personally as a communication vehicle. Previously, there were town squares where you would share what's happening and share your thoughts. And now I see it as a vehicle to be able to acquaint oneself with a person or a thing. So in that sense, connection. But I don't see it as a sense of true connection and a true sense of a vehicle that could truly foster a sense of belonging. To feel a sense of belonging, one has to feel seen and accepted and have a sense of mattering. So it's mattering, Isaac Prelintensky, the researcher, his work shares that mattering has two components where it's about feeling valued. So it's about feeling the sense that others care about you, that they notice you, that you matter to them, and that you also add value. So there's that sense that you contribute to something meaningful to others or to a group. And that's really difficult to do on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the metrics on social media in that sense is like the number of likes or comments that you get, which isn't really a true form of, in my mind, feeling valued. I know influencers these days have to get a certain number of clicks, but in terms of this sense of belonging and trying to define it, what kind of metrics would you use?
For social media?
Not for social media, but just in general, like the term belonging.
Yeah, I think really, truly that idea of mattering is really, really important. The two components need to coexist, which is like feeling valued and adding value. And so I'll give you an example. One of my clients, which is the Vancouver Art Gallery, where I'm the lead well-being consultant for their Art of Wellbeing Lab. So the leadership had a brilliant idea. Just to give you some background, when you visit the Vancouver Art Gallery, you walk up to this building that it looks quite historical. It's got pillars. It was formerly a courthouse, so a place of judgment. The leadership recognized that just from the outside the perimeter, people would potentially not necessarily feel like they were accepted in that place for obvious reasons. And so there's a plaza outside, and so there's a lot of activity outside. There's often, vendors outside. Sometimes people busk there. There were dancers that were performing outside there. One day, the leadership decided that Sears Rao and Eva Rasminer, the leadership, and Sears decided, it's interesting that there's this group of dancers outside the gallery, and we're having this art party where it was really about enlivening the gallery for everyone, all of Vancouver, to be able to experience it. It's one night where there's music, there's DJs, there's dance, there's activation of creative expression, and there's drinks, and there's, tours and educational tours of the exhibition. It's a super, super fun night, and it's for everyone. And he said, why don't we invite the dancers inside to participate in the art party? So you can see that on the outside, these dancers, they add value. There's people that are walking, tourists, Vancouverites who are watching them, enjoying their dance, enjoying their art form. But inviting them inside into the gallery space to take part in a art party, which happens only once a year. It happened twice a year back then. But to invite them inside and say, you know what, you don't just belong outside in the community, you belong inside too. We really value you. We want you to be part of this really important event that is for everyone. So that's the difference. That's them feeling valued and also adding value. They're adding value to this event. They're adding value to this mission where they really wanted people to understand that the gallery is for everyone. And so that's, to me, a great example of really a way in which a cultural institution has tried to foster belonging in the community.
So, Paula, seems like that, there are two things probably, happens there, right? Because in the social media, to do that, sometimes it can be difficult, right? Because you have to feel valued, but then also you feel that you're contributing also. There are two aspects of that, right?
Yes.
But I think it's not just social media, right? It's it's just in general, what belonging is. I think, Paula, what you were mentioning before is that social media can be a vehicle, but it's not necessarily the end goal. You can use social media as a tool, but not as the defining thing of how you are valued. Am I correct in how I'm summarizing this?
Yeah, I think so. I think, social media it's a device to raise awareness and to bring awareness to people and to things. I mean, Facebook started out where we were able to connect with old high school classmates. And so it was that vehicle of communication that enabled us to connect. So it can facilitate connection, but I don't ultimately think it's going to facilitate a sense of mattering and belonging.
I think I love the distinction, because I think many of us confuse between belonging with simply, having people around you.
Right.
So that is not necessarily the belonging, yet that can be one aspect of it, but there is another fold to it.
I'm wondering, in your line of work, how do you bring strangers together and create this sense of belonging? Or even if it's not strangers, but just colleagues or acquaintances, how do you create this kind of community and sense of belonging?
So I'm an advisor for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And in that role, and as a workplace well-being strategist, I work predominantly with workplaces, but those workplaces could also be educational institutions, so leadership groups within educational institutions, but also corporate. And when I have facilitated, I designed and I facilitate what I call Oto Wonder gatherings, which is a gathering to bring people together. I break them up in small groups, and within those groups, everybody shares their story of wonder. So it could be a song of wonder. In some cases, we have a music focus. In other cases, it could be a person, place, or thing that inspires wonder, beauty, and that's really meaningful to them. And so they share that in the group, and then I train each person how to really listen attentively to the stories and how to actively, constructively respond to their stories by spotting the strength in the person that is elicited through their story of wonder. And everybody in the group has a turn sharing their strengths that they notice. And there's some deep reflection that happens with the person that shares a story afterwards. But it's very connecting. And I've held it not just in workplaces, but also within students and universities and colleges. And that has been really meaningful too, because one really meaningful moment was when I was actually lecturing on music and well-being. And then afterwards, we did an Ode to Wonder gathering with the songs. And the group, when I was lecturing, would ask them questions, and there was no participation. Like, nobody wanted to share anything. And at the end, after the Wonder gatherings, I asked for some people to come and share. And there was 3 students that just totally raised their hand, came to the front of the class and shared their experience. And one of them said, it felt vulnerable, but in a really safe way. And she said, I have been in this group for group projects that I was sitting in for the Ode to Wonder gathering for the whole year, and I didn't know anything about my classmates. And now I have such a profound respect for what they've been through. I know who they are, and I feel so much more connected to them. And so it's interesting that we can, to your point, we can belong to a group, but we don't necessarily feel that sense of belonging. Yeah.
This is a very interesting point, Paula, you said, because, so many, when you go into the school, colleges, you do projects with so many people. But if you ask, and, usually how the professor asks you to rank them, and usually we rank them on the group projects, how did they participated, but we don't know. A lot of time people don't know anything beyond that project. Even if you have done a 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a whole semester or whole year project together, you really don't know everybody there. It's very, very, very difficult, So yeah. That's really interesting. Actually, one of my friends recently just told me that from last 2 years, she has been busy every weekend. Her calendar has been full, but she has been feeling so lonely. She said, I just don't understand. I try to be so busy. I have a full-time job. Then I have a social life. Even despite having such a full calendar and traveling, I just don't feel connected. I just don't feel to myself.
It's really interesting studying loneliness. I learned that researchers, they define loneliness as a social pain, and it's a perceived gap that we have between the relationships that we have and the relationships we aspire to have. So we can be very busy. We can have, belong to this community, that community, have people around us all the time, but still experience loneliness because we may not really truly feel seen or notice in our strengths or notice in a way that's really meaningful to us. And so the danger, I think, is that there's a misconception that loneliness is social isolation, that you're not around people. Those are 2 different things.
So why do you think, Paula, that belonging is so hard? Why do people struggle?
There's a variety of things. I think, the probability of fostering, these social ties, like these interactions with people and even with strangers, and therefore forming relationships with people is a lot less likely these days because, like you said, we are busy. Some of us work remotely. So the likelihood that we're going to have an interaction with a stranger when we're working from home is lessened. There's also, pretty sharp decline, according to sociologists, in informal community spaces where belonging can be nurtured. So there's less propensity for people to go out and be in these third spaces, or, there's the decline in people attending church or congregations where there is more likelihood that they're going to be able to form, some kind of social relationship. And social media also gives you that false sense of that you are interacting, that you are connecting with people. So I think there's multiple things. So one, in order to get to belonging, we have to have a frequency of interactions with other humans. Mm-hmm. And if that frequency is lessened, the less likelihood that you're going to be able to experience that sense of belonging where other people see you and accept you and where you matter to them. So I think the first step is to really pay attention to our social fitness, like it is, a muscle. If we don't engage and socially interact, there is a sense of atrophy. So it's as important, our social health, as our physical and our mental health. And you're hearing, doctors talk a lot about it, a lot more, and the importance of our social health, because there are studies that show that the mortality risks associated with loneliness are comparable to the mortality risks of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and that there are links to cardiovascular disease and depression, mental health, mental illness, and diabetes, a whole host of diseases. And that's because as humans, we have a need to belong. It's as important as our needs for food and shelter. And when we don't have that sense of belonging, our nervous systems are aroused. They stay aroused until we can form connection. If we have our nervous systems that stay aroused and that are in a chronic state of arousal, then it can potentially lead to disease.
Yeah, I know that a former U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, had commented a lot, and a lot of his focus was on the loneliness epidemic. What I'm really curious about is I've heard you talk about this idea of social prescription, art prescription. That's not something I learned in medical school. So I'd love if you can talk about that idea more, and how is that something we can implement?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it started in the UK because they determined that there was a large population that were seeing physicians who were going to see physicians due to factors like social determinants of health, like they were experiencing loneliness or social isolation, and that it was becoming a strain on the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure. So they appointed a minister of loneliness, and they started this kind of emerging healthcare movement called social prescribing, where the doctor would then refer the patient to what's called the link worker, and the link worker would sit with the patient, do motivational interviewing, understand their needs, and then they would signpost them, meaning that they would refer them to different community resources and activities that could support them depending on what their need was and what their interests were, where their interests lie. So say, for instance, they were experiencing loneliness. There was somebody, they would say, well, what did you used to enjoy? What do you enjoy? Oh, I really like to sing. It really brings me a lot of joy to sing. Then they would look in the community to see where there could be some choral groups, and they'd post them to a choral group, and they would follow them for a period of time and sort of become allies to this person. If they were interested in visual art, then they might signpost them to a museum for museum visits. If they were interested in fishing, they might find a fishing group. So it's now happening in 30 countries worldwide, social prescribing. And art prescriptions is really becoming more and more prevalent because there's a rich body of research now that shows the upstream benefits to engaging in arts and culture. And that's not just, from a psychological well-being standpoint, it really helps your mental health, but also your physical health. And so that's what I'm really involved in right now here in Vancouver is building an ecosystem of doctors and researchers, Indigenous elders, and other healthcare practitioners that are now prescribing both nature and the arts. So it's with the Vancouver Art Gallery through the Art of Wellbeing Lab, we've launched a program where we're collaborating with BC Parks Foundation and their PRX nature prescription program, where doctors can refer patients who are experiencing social determinants of health and loneliness and social isolation and other needs to nature park visits. And with that, they get complimentary entry into the Vancouver Art Gallery's nature-inspired artwork through Emily Carr's artwork. So it's like an indoor forest bathing experience. We also have seniors programs where the seniors are now engaging in arts as well for the health and well-being. And so it really makes a lot of sense to me, because that's essentially what I experienced. Was I was given a movement and an art prescription, a music prescription, at a time when I was very vulnerable. And I saw how much it helped me and my family get back on my feet. And when I experienced that, I thought this should be available to everyone. And so when I learned that there was actually a name for it, that it was growing worldwide, it was a movement, I went back to grad school at U of Penn to study a master's in applied positive psychology, and really wanted to understand the psychological underpinnings of why it was so why it could be so impactful. And I did my final capstone on art prescriptions and building a well-being pathway.
And to follow up on the idea of like art prescription, because I think I read somewhere that when people go to museums, like their blood pressure and heart rate like slow down and lower. What are some practical tips you have for people who are in a funk or who are kind of in that downward spiral? Like, what would you recommend they like do as like practical steps to sort of uplift themselves up and like get back to that sense of belonging? Because I think sometimes people have that, but then they don't have the maintenance part of the belonging. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one that is accurate about spending time in museums can lower your cortisol levels and stress response. That would be a good start. Is like visit your local gallery or art and cultural institution, and it's interesting the stats on how much time people spend looking at a piece of artwork. It's like less than 30 seconds. Like it's really very brief. So this idea of slow looking at artwork and really spending time looking at a piece of artwork and just spending time understanding, like, am I drawn to this piece of artwork? Is it kind of repelling me? Slowing down our thinking, slowing down, connecting to our breath, spending time in nature as well, and connecting to nature can really have benefits from just like the physiological response of also lowering our stress response, and also cognitively having like our attention restored. What I guide my clients through is really looking at what brings them and almost like documenting what gives them a sense of awe and wonder. And when they come across it, and documenting it. And that can also be, Dr. Keltner wrote a great book on, and he studies awe, and he talks about a study where there was over 2,000 people that him and his colleague had surveyed and asked experiences of awe that made them feel small next to something vast and incomprehensible, and changed their understanding or challenged their understanding of the world. And from those experiences, they created a taxonomy of those experiences. And so they call them the 8 wonders in life. And so things that you would normally think of, like nature, visual, art and design, birth, death, that collective effervescence that you feel from like weddings or bar mitzvahs. But one of the number one wonders, which fascinated me, was moral beauty. And that's when we see other people behave with such pure intention, kindness, courage, overcoming. And that happens around us all the time. We don't pay attention to it. And so what I guide leaders to really encourage them in the workplace is to really train their teams and to recognize when they come across moral beauty in their fellow colleagues. And that that could be really, really simple things where somebody's going out of their way to help a fellow colleague, going out of their way to make the team stronger in ways that have really nothing to do with the project, right? But that their input has a lasting impact on the team and the organization. There's so much awe around us all the time that we don't really notice. So it's really focusing our attention on these moments of awe and wonder that happen around us all the time, whether it's through our natural environment or whether it's through our interactions with people.
I think how you have defined the belonging and like how you were saying that belonging has two aspects, like you feel valued and then you're creating value. And I think that happens all the time. We see at the workplace that how it dies away because when people do starting, they said, oh gosh, I'm going to input this, I'm going to create this, like excited. And over the period, then there is no acknowledgement and the pie gets up and up somewhere. Within the inside, it just dies for people. And I think to uplift that, and it takes a lot of time, it takes an effort, right? So I think feeling that constantly, that connecting, it does require a lot of intentional effort from all around.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that is really an impediment to belonging is this idea in the workplace that our workforce is really utilitarian. That they come with a set of skills. What is your background? What is your skills? What's your expertise? That they don't see the person as a human being. And in order to have a sense of belonging, to feel value, to feel noticed, to feel like you're adding value and through contributing in a meaningful way, the acknowledgement has to be there that you're a human being that has these experiences and these strengths that you have that go way beyond a skill set. And so I think that's the number one thing that needs to be acknowledged, and understanding that people have different life experiences that shape the way that they see the world and also the way that they behave in the workplace. And that also imbues a sense of empathy. Empathy is really, in my opinion, there's a great Harvard professor and researcher by the name of Frances Fry, and her and Anne Morris, they have this theory of a trust triangle that really, in order to have psychological safety in the workplace, in order to have that, we need, have to have trust. And trust has three components according to their trust triangle model, which is empathy, authenticity, and logic. And so empathy is like that you acknowledge that, the work needs to get done, the project needs to get done, but who's the person behind that? Understanding that people have lives outside of work, that they're human beings. I mean, that's really, really important in order to foster that sense of trust. If we don't have that, it's really difficult to foster belonging, where somebody feels like they're being noticed in a way that's meaningful to them, that are able to contribute in a way that's meaningful to the team.
That makes a lot of sense. I was going to say, usually we round up our conversations with like a takeaway. But I think just to keep in line with, what you've been teaching us and sharing with us, I think it'd be nice if each of us shared like something that we've had, like that's been a moment of awe and wonder for us recently. And I can share with myself that the twins have been playing with each other. And I have just been in so much awe of like how much they recognize and can feel for each other. Like my son hit his head, his sister came crawling up to her and like patted him on the head. And like, there's so many little things that I see them every day. Like they recognize us, they recognize these little things. Like every day is a new motor milestone that they're hitting. So that's been my awe and wonder, is just like observing my little ones.
For me, I can tell that actually my sister-in-law just visited for the National Friendship Day to the blind school for girls. And she sent me the video, and I have been looking at that video constantly because I was just so awed with how those blind girls were expressing, full of joy. They were singing, they were doing the art, and how they were playing and eating. And I'm like, how happy, and how it is just amazing how they are experiencing the life without the eyes, so you don't have to have, how we do perfectly define that this, you can still experience and feel belong.
Yes. Oh, it's beautiful. I love those two examples. Well, I just got back from Europe. And my intention with this trip with my sons, because my eldest son's going into university, and I know that we're not going to have a lot of mutually inclusive times to travel in for a while, at least. He's going into engineering, and I really wanted both my boys to experience that sense of awe and wonder from, instances historically where it's been a troubling time, but where these individuals and group of individuals came together in a way that was, through their own mastery, were able to really propel movements forward that had a trickle-down effect in terms of how we are now living as a human species, and that I wanted them to not feel apathetic about the world, because it can feel like a really dark time for young people. And so I really intentionally wanted them to experience Florence and to see, the Renaissance, and to see these incredible works of art, to study Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and all the other masters. And we ended up at the Accademia Galleria and saw the statue of David. And I'd already been before years ago. And I remember being very impressed with it. But this time with my sons, we had a tour guide who an art educator who was taking us through it. So that was really, it brought it to life. But I remember walking into the space and feeling really overwhelmed, like I was going to cry. Like I was so moved to tears. I was holding the tears back. And I was really moved by the artwork. What was so meaningful was a couple of days later, we were having a conversation about what it was like. And I said, "What did you like?" And my eldest son said, "Yeah, I just was really surprised at myself. Like I almost started crying. Got really emotional." I was like, "Oh my gosh, that happened to me too." So it was that awe, that moment of awe, and being able to experience that with my sons was so meaningful. It was so much better the second time around. I saw things that I never saw the first time around.
Wow.
No, I understand.
That's so special.
So if today's, for our listeners, if today's conversation resonates with you, we would encourage you to think about one simple question this week. Where do I already belong, and where could I help someone else feel like they belong? And thank you for joining us on 3 Takes.
And Paula, if any of our listeners wanted to connect with you, is there any kind of platform you want to plug?
Yeah, just my website would be great, www.otowonder.com.
Amazing.
And they can also find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thanks, Paula. Thanks for joining us on 3 Takes. If something we shared sparked a new thought or opened up a conversation with someone you love, we want to hear about it. DM us on Instagram at 3.takes, email us at connect@3takes.com, or visit us at www.3takes.com. And if this episode meant something to you, share it with another mother, daughter, or sister in your life. It's how we grow and keep the stories moving.